Working on the issues of generational communication for many years, 20 years in academia. And before that, I was 30 years in advertising, where I learned about communication. And I was concerned with the way different generations were being treated by the industry I was in. And eventually, as I'll show you in a minute, I left them. And so this whole issue of generations and how we communicate is really important to me. I've given up lots of things to actually be the expert in that area. So when I heard Jez, who I must admit I've met before, I was inspired by him. But when I heard him talking about this, I couldn't believe I'd found somebody who I thought, this is the man, this is the person who is going to change this whole issue of the housing crisis. Because his vision is not a stupid vision of, well, it's all out there and one day we'll get it. He's got this wonderful vision of it's all out there. We don't know what it's going to look like, because if we did, it's already being done. But his vision, his attitude is also, it's not going to be easy. His attitude is going to take a long time. And I also, for my other specialisation, I teach creative thinking and innovation. And that's one of the key things. These things take time. There is no such thing as suddenly getting the light bulb. It doesn't work. Nobody ever does that. That's not how any innovation works. It takes time. And it takes making mistakes. And Jez knows this. So I was really inspired to be part of it. I'm a Mac person. This is a PC. Wait. Intergenerational living, are we starting with the wrong focus age? That's my daughter, so she's sitting there, and that's focus and age and all these kind of things. I think we are. Now it sounds weird to say that intergenerational living and say we've got the wrong focus on age, but yeah, I think we are. And I'll explain why. Starting with two stories. When I was in advertising, Wall's Ice Cream came to us. And they had a completely new version of a lollipop. The trouble is they didn't know what to do with it. They had no brand. But the fact is, they could make a lollipop which was shaped. You couldn't do that before. They were all shaped like rockets. But now you could shape them. This was late 70s. And I was on the creative team. There were two of us that had to come up with ideas for this. All we knew, you could make a shaped lollipop and it can't have shaped sharp corners, otherwise they'd break off. So we found out they were for children aged 7 to 11. And Wall's marketing department had the data on this, and they told us what it really should be. So we were thinking, well, why come to us anyway? So they said it needs to be a space character. And so we persuaded the agency to let us go to spend time with children of that age, which of course nowadays would be very hard to do, but then it wasn't. And we did. We spent 2 weeks, and we noticed children were not concerned then with space characters, not at that age. They were obsessed with their bodies, because their bodies were growing. And I remember what it was like at that age. My arms hurt. Rather. I come from Derbyshire, but my arms hurt. And there was an obsession with bodies, and they'd stick their tongues out at each other, and stick their fingers up their nose and point at each other, and do nasty little things like that. And we thought, oh, hang on, this is it. And so we designed a series of lollipops ideas, which were based on, a pair of lips with the tongue sticking out, a big nose with a finger up it, and all sorts of things. We knew it would work. And Walls hated it, and our bosses at the agency hated it and threatened to fire us if we continued with it. And we said, no, we know, we've been. You're wrong about stage camp. We've been to schools, we know. So eventually they took these away, and we had a big hand and a big pink foot. And they said, okay, we've tested it against some other characters, and yeah, it seems to work, but we're not sure yet. So they fired us as an agency anyway, and just paid us off. And what happened was we weren't very popular in the agency, but about 18 months later, there came on sale this big pink foot, which they'd call Funny Feet. And for a certain age groups, because I then went into teaching some years after that at universities, and I realised that when I was teaching the undergraduates, they were that age group. They were those people, and they treated me like a hero. And I need to change the world in a better way than that. So that changed my life in some ways, because I realised that you can't solve any problem, even a problem as basic as that. You can't solve it without you've got really good insight. You cannot do that. And you can't design anything, whether it's a house or a lollipop or a chair, without you really have insight into the users. You must never make assumptions when you're trying to solve problems. And you must never look at anything that's a stereotype. Because if you look at anybody, any person, as a stereotype, they're not real. In the early 90s, after that, I went to the Royal College of Art one day to get some inspiration. And I saw a book called Designing Our Future Selves by Roger Coleman. It was groundbreaking. The book was groundbreaking. It led on to what's called inclusive design, as it's called now. It wasn't then. But Roger Coleman said, when people get older, they need a certain kind of product. When people are disabled, they need a certain kind of product. And his theory was that if we design those products, we actually design better products that are better for most people. And it just that whole thing blew my mind. I was a communication designer, not a product designer. But the whole idea blew my mind. And within a few years, I was doing a master's on this whole subject with Jeremy Meisen, who's the professor now of that subject at the Royal College of Art. And he really led me further into this, so that at age 51, I moved out of design and advertising as full-time and became an academic. And I taught and researched the subject of communication to different generations, particularly starting with older ones. And as has been said, at 64 I got a PhD. And at the same time, I went to the doctors because I'd got a slight pull in a muscle in my leg. Actually, no, I was 66 when this happened, and the doctor said, you shouldn't be working at your age. And I thought he'd find something else. And he got really worried. He said, no, he hadn't. He just felt I shouldn't be working at my age. And I was working internationally in Singapore, Hong Kong and Birmingham in the UK, running a master's course and actually researching into this issue of generational stereotyping. And he suddenly, and there was the doctor, he didn't know me, he was a locum, so I'll forgive him. And I have to forgive him because he was actually an example of what I'm going to talk about tonight. It's professionals who've actually begun to believe that generational stereotypes are real. And this affects young people just as much as it affects old. I get so excited sometimes I forget where I am on the notes. Yeah, and yes, I did a TED Talk at 70, and I'm now doing another course, which my daughter's the lecturer. So we are swapping information. That's how it should be. We should swap information. We should learn from each other and stop seeing each other as generations. And they're the kind of communities we need to build. And we need to build houses that allow that. Generational stereotyping is creating myths about different generations that's making the attempt at clear and deep insights impossible. Now, you might think, well, no, I don't know what you want to do. You might think, no, I don't do it, but I do it. I do it. I start thinking of generations as stereotypes, even with all the thinking I do around it. It's almost ingrained into our society. We have to shift it. We will really not solve community and cities until we shift this. And I've never in my lifetime found the separation of generations as different silos like now. We can't keep doing this. So, I think architects, designers, planners, health professionals, politicians, educationalists, house builders, not everybody. There are some people here tonight, and 2 speakers tonight I don't include in this. And some of you I won't include in this. If you're here, you're probably not one of them. But many actually cannot see a person clearly because they're thinking of the generational stereotype. Massianis and Plummer are 2 sociologists, and they said stereotyping is an irrational generalization of a whole group of people with little regard to fact. That's brilliant. Stereotyping is irrational. It's a generational generalization of a whole group of people, and it's got very little regard to fact. The kind of generational stereotypes that we can mention here are baby boomers, millennials, Generation X, Generation Z, seniors. But I'll even include into that the description of pensioners, or youth, or elderly. They're just stereotypes. They're not looking at people, they're stereotypes. There's a belief that generational stereotyping works, and in marketing, this belief is still there. And in certain areas of HR, it's still there. And that belief is based on that each generation shares certain values, attitudes, experiences and challenges with each other. So I was born in 1947, and that means that anybody born between 1947 and 1964 are exactly like me, because they're classed as baby boomers. It's nonsense. Of course it's nonsense. The same with the whole idea of a millennial. It's nonsense. Look, I've taught many generations. In this master's course, I was teaching people from their 20s into their mid-60s. None of them fit generational stereotypes. One of the, if we take health, we're not all going to die after a long illness. And this is very difficult to talk about this stuff. But I am 71, so I can talk about it. We're not all going to die after a long illness. Some, like my mother, will die in almost an instant. Others, like my father, will take probably a couple of years. But I just want everyone to question this idea that older people are a draw, are too expensive. Some are expensive and others aren't. Even if some are expensive, that shouldn't be a problem. Others aren't at all. You see, we don't all age the same way. And age isn't about old, it's about young as well. That's an age. We don't all age in our 20s or our 30s or our 50s or our 70s or 80s in the same way. We are stupidly, as a society, concentrating only on chronological age. That's the age you are from the number of years you've lived from when you were born. That doesn't define you. If anything, we should concentrate more on biological age, which is about the development and deterioration of our bodies. Development when you get younger and deterioration possibly when we're older. And we should concentrate on psychological age, which is the development and deterioration of our emotional maturity and our ability to think logically and creatively. They're far more important to consider. But people are not the same in that, of course. We're individuals. And we're individuals across age. So a 70-year-old could run upstairs. So it doesn't, when you're designing houses, for older people, 70-year-olds, don't think we all need a different way than stairs. Stairs are actually really good if you're in your 70s because they keep your heart and lungs going when it's raining and you can't get outside. So you can have a 70-year-old who can run upstairs and a 35-year-old who can't. You can have a 35-year-old who's got a strong emotional maturity that could make them a leader. A 25-year-old who's got a strong emotional maturity could make them a leader. But because they've got this name 25, we tend not to make them leaders. One of the best managing directors I ever worked for was 23. And it could happen now. So this is not just about old people, it's about younger as well. Okay. Where's this? Oh. PC work. Yes, brilliant. I spoke to Birmingham University freshers at about 10 o'clock at night. There's about 500 of them about 2 weeks ago. And it was the same sort of subject. And they were fabulous. They were really listening. But as soon as I touched this kind of thing, it all went wrong. I had to say, oh, old people. When I was on nearly 10 o'clock, 5 minutes. Thank you. I'll shut up, tell you that other thing later. Okay. So what can we, as you know, I still am a designer, really. I'm not an architect. I mean, I've worked with architects. I can't pretend to be. I'm not a specialist in digital, and I can't pretend to be. But I've worked with digital specialists. And what can all of us do who want to make a change in this? Well, effective solutions are based on insights. We've got to make sure we have really clear insights. Whenever we start to answer any problem. Stereotyping obscures insights. So, reject, when you get data, if it's not clear, reject it. There's too much acceptance of stuff. Actually, that's the one thing I did learn through a PhD, is once you actually do research in depth, most of what we read, most of what we find out about is rubbish. And actually, you know, if you're a designer, if you're an architect, if you're a planner, and you see information about an age group which depicts them as stereotypes, send that data back. Ask them to prove it. Don't let anybody make assumptions. Because this whole thing is a pack of cards that'll fall down when we realise the assumptions that are there. So ask people, when they present you with data, ask people to prove it. Ask people to show the evidence. Because in a lot of cases, they can't. Look for commonality. Didn't think I'd ever use that word, actually, commonality. It's an academic term. Jo Cox said, I know she was talking about more than just age, she was talking about all of us, which we can easily say. But we've far more in common than divides us, which is actually the point I'm going to make. We have far more in common than divides us. So the other thing is when you're looking at intergenerational projects, start to look for what we share across generations, not what divides us. It's too easy to look at division. Not all older people are going to be ill, but also, if you watch my TED talk, you'll know this, is that my wife's been, she's sitting here, but my wife's been disabled since she was 27. And we thought that she would, we were learning to be old. In fact, we found out now we are old, we weren't learning that at all. Because disability and illness and old age don't come in a bundle like software. They're separate, and they should be respected. All of them should be respected. So look for commonality. We share values across generations. I've researched this, but I've also put it into practice, and in my teaching across multi-generational classes, I've tried it out. We share more values than we don't, We share more interests. We share challenges. So if you're disabled at 30 and you share the challenge of a disabled person who's 80, you share that same challenge. Start to look at how they can be solved together. Shared values and the recognition of shared values and the recognition of shared challenges creates trust between people. And these silos of generations break down. I can't talk too much about this, I'll have to keep going because I'm nearly finished. He's going to say, stop it. Stop. There are now 5 generations working in the workplace. Isn't that amazing? I don't think that's ever been before. Because there are people in the workplace in their 80s. And that started as soon as the supposed generation of Generation Z actually started work, which was not that long ago. So we've got 5 generations working in the workplace. What can we learn from them? What can we learn from companies like Aviva, who are going out to actually pull generations together? They say, look, we tell our staff, and we just look, learn, look, listen, and learn from each other. Okay, somebody told me this the other day. I've changed it a bit. It's a Bible quote based from Acts 2, verse 17. And I've altered it to make it more modern language. But basically it says, the young will have vision and the old will dream dreams and we'll build them together. That is the dream I had when I was teaching full-time at the university. Because I'd got older students in their 60s, I'd got younger students in their 20s, and together, put in teams, they were creating some fantastic innovation. They were professionals, they were designers, and they were creating some fantastic innovation. It's not just the sharing of skills and knowledge, it goes further than that. It creates something special, and we need to do more of that. We need to create communities where that can happen, where innovation can happen. There's a huge, this is my last thing, there's a huge untapped resource for problem solving, which is generations together. Now, okay, I've experimented with that. I've experimented at the university and outside the university. We need to take it bigger. I've started well, it's an idea. It's called Born to Connect. And I'm going around. I've been made a fellow of the Royal Society of Art, so I can do this kind of work in there as well. And I'm out in the last years of my life. I'm out to make a difference in this field. And if you're sitting here, I know you will be as well. And for those of you who are already doing these things well that we talked about, thank you. Because I don't think the country's ever needed it more than at the moment. I'm fed up with seeing people living on the street. I'm fed up with really great younger people that I know who can't afford a house. This is ridiculous. But we're not going to do it by splitting generations and blaming each other. We can only do it by coming together. So thank you.
Thank you. I really wasn't trying to hassle you out of it. It felt terrible to away from it. So I think we'll keep questions to the end. I'm sure it's got a set of people thinking. So if you don't mind hanging on to those for a while. Julie, do you want to come up? Yeah. So Julie Snell, CEO of Bristol Open. Extensive background in business and strategy around IT and tech.
Quick, Tracy.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. Clive, I'm not sure how I'm going to follow that. To say you've just challenged my thinking is a bit of an understatement.
Oh, crap.
Just before I start, perhaps I could tell you a little bit about myself. I'm not sure if that goes on to my first slide. Yeah, so there's a big group. Must be getting age. I forgot to put my name on it. I just want to tell you a story, I think, that kind of relates to what Clive has been talking about. I've had a very blessed career. I've been very, very lucky. I have managed to be at the forefront of lots of new technology, and I actually had the privilege of developing, launching, delivering the BT public Wi-Fi when it was literally nothing more than a vision. The lab had been playing with this chip, and I was able to take that on its whole journey, and I literally went on to be the chair of the Global Wireless Broadband Alliance. I spent 5 years of my career, completely and utterly developing a new technology that freed our laptops from being connected to a piece of wire that meant we were stuck to a desk. And there was a point in that time that my colleagues in BT, who were particularly in the sales and the environment where they were on the road, would give me a lot of grief about making their lives miserable, because now they were contactable, their orders should be loaded while they're on the road, and the boss wanted them to work more than 10 till 4 in the day. And although I actually let it roll off me at the time, as the years rolled on, and I look at the journey that I've been part of and enabling a whole new generation to walk around glued to wireless devices and very rarely looking up. And I've really learned that in the last few days. It's been 29 years since I've gone on a bike, and this city has made me take up biking again. And I have realised it's not the traffic that's the problem, it's avoiding people who are all stuck to a wireless device. So, when they came and asked me to come out of my semi-retirement and come and do this job just over a year ago, I asked myself, do I really want to go back to work? Heavens above, I'm enjoying retirement. I'm doing a bit of consultancy, working from home in my pyjamas, never really had to do anything of any real pressure. And now I'm back working 70 hours a week. I'm not sure where we're on. But the reason I took the job was this city, its attitude, its innovation, its ability to actually empower people to go and make change. And that's what attracted me to this, and the fact that the basic building blocks were there. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the building blocks and kind of what brought me here. So absolutely back to, why Bristol? Well, those of you who are from Bristol, is everybody from Bristol here tonight? Is anybody not from Bristol? Ah, I knew, you've flown off. All right, okay. Well, I'm sure most of you know about Isabel Brunel. He's one of our biggest designers. And there's a lot of examples of his work around the world. And you've also got that stretch all the way through to the media companies. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Wallace and Gromit. They're obviously made here, and we've got a very strong media section and a lot of growth. I think I remember the other day I was talking at an economy event, so I'd done my research, and I think it's 43% of startup businesses in this region survive. That's a staggering figure. So many startups don't survive. And it's because we support them, and it's because we've got that intellectual knowledge, and we just create in this environment. It must be something to do with the air here, I think. Now, the City Council and the University of Bristol realised that there was something here that needed capturing. So 4 years ago, they decided to set up Bristol is Open. So I'm jointly owned. I run a company that's jointly owned by both of them. Some interesting challenges. I have politics on one side, and then I have academic politics, and they are very different. You didn't quite expect that when I started this particular role, but it keeps me awake at night. Now, I'm very briefly going to try and talk about what Bristol is Open on one page. So excuse it being a little bit busy, but I'm trying not to get into too many slides. So fundamentally, what you can see is like a big ring here, and that's how I'm just going to try and visualize it. Now, actually, some of you here are probably old enough, and some of you probably aren't. Does anyone remember the Rediffusion television network?
Yes.
Yeah. Television was connected by a physical cable that came in through a duct. Now, Bristol City Council had the vision for some reason 10 or 11 years ago to buy that ducting when the company went under, because they no longer needed fixed communications. So this city's got an incredible, valuable asset. Now, I can tell you that if I want to put a piece of fibre in the ground, if the road's up, and a lot of them are at the moment, it'll cost me £1.50 a metre to put a duct in that I can put fibre in. If I've got to go and dig that duct, it could be anything from £300 to £600 a metre, depending on the fancy pavement that's on the top, and the number of restrictions, and the disruption I'm going to cause to the city. So the fact that this city owns its own ducting has given us a head start on trying to ensure we have enough fibre to start utilising and understanding technology. So we have literally got a huge fibre ring around the centre of the city at the moment. And off that fibre ring, I have got just about every form of wireless technology you can imagine. We're set up as a private network, so this isn't open to the public. This is for companies and research and innovation to use the network to basically push and try technology, and you can literally break it if you want, because we can manage it. We manage it as a commercial network, so it looks like a commercial network. So you have the engine shed here, and I'm sure most of you know the engine shed's where we have a lot of our SME startups, very much the kind of business orientation. You've got the creatives in the watershed. Funnily enough, you've got a node here in We the Curious, and the other node is in the university. Now that means our network replicates a real live network, so you really can understand it. And I think there's a classic. We're working with 2 or 3 European cities on a project, and each of these cities have come up with a new form of technology, and they had a box in their labs and a piece of fibre between them, and it worked superbly. In Florence, Barcelona, Southampton, they gave it to us and said, put it in the network. This is really going to work. And we put it in the network, and it started at the university. It hit this node and went, well, I don't know what to do now, there's a firewall in the way. Oh, and actually there's different options. And all of a sudden, the students who developed this realised there was another layer that they had to go down. Now, they were very excited at the time, and it felt a little bit like I was popping their balloon. But once they realised that the real world is a little bit, diverse, and you've got to have different layers, they went back and they fixed it, and it looks like, and I can't talk about it, but it looks like it's a box that's actually going to make commercialised business. So giving them the access to that was really important, because their ID could so easily have just failed had they taken it to the commercial world, who may not have been tolerant of the fact that he didn't know how to multitask. So this infrastructure sits there and is enabling everybody to come and use it. It's very much the backbone of the city strategy. So in the city, we have what's called the One City Plan. And that One City Plan, we're developing that, was an eye-opener to me. When I arrived in this job, for the first 6 months, every Tuesday morning, I spent at City Hall, which is how I first met Jez. And I was part of business leaders, community leaders, people from within the city who were all part of building the city's strategy. It wasn't just a council led one, and that was a bit of an eye-opener to me. I've never seen anything like that. I've also never seen so many post-it notes in my life. We literally did housing, we did transport, we did energy. What was the 4th stream? We went through everything trying to understand what are the issues and problems hitting this city, and how do we develop a strategy that took us to 2050, and then how do we deliver that? So having got this strategy, the work that I do is totally underpinning it. So we have the strategy piece, that then comes down to me to say, right, these are the issues we need to address. How do we push that technology forward? And then we hand it into live service. And we've had some really good successes in the city. I keep wanting to press the button on the Mac because that's what I belong. I'm another Mac user. So what came out of it was that the top level issues facing the city, and unfortunately this comes down to data, so I'm not sure, I feel comfortable talking about it now. We are the 3rd most congested city in the country. I don't have to tell anybody of you here, behind London and Manchester. That in itself is creating us a huge pollution problem, which we're really, really focusing on trying to fix. On the other hand, we've also had this stagnant growth because we are living longer, but that has meant there's a 50% increase of people over 85 living in this region. And unfortunately, we've discovered an awful lot of these people are also living in isolation. They're living on their own. You've also got the city of 2 halves. On the one half, we're such an amazing city. We are so strong. One part of Bristol, 80% of those children are going on to higher education. They're becoming our innovators and our SMEs. But literally 8 minutes drive away, 5% of our children, that's it, are going on to higher education. Now there is actually a distinct link between this group as well. They're all the other side of the digital divide. And I say that in the context that if you're in the city cluster or you're in a fairly wealthy estate, the BTs of this world, the Virgin Medias, they've all gone there. you can get broadband, you can probably even get fibre. Unfortunately, most of these areas are very badly served, very few have got broadband, and if the broadband was there, the chances are they can't afford it. This is the area of the city where we've got 3 generations that haven't worked, because this is where we've lost our physical manufacturing jobs, some of the aerospace, the tobacco, work that they were all doing. So this group has fallen behind dramatically, and they also seem to be struggling to communicate with the council. So I have had the privilege of going and spending time in those areas with those people, and I'll be honest, I was extremely humbled. And I probably am ashamed to say I was probably one of those professionals that made assumptions about intergenerational groups and different groups of society. And I think the best way I can describe it is an example of a young lady I was talking to who started up her web design business, and she was in one of these centres in one of the most deprived areas of this city. And she'd been doing it for 3 years now, and she was really very successful and doing really well. And I was sat there in my thinking, so why hasn't she moved to nicer premises and done something in the city centre, where maybe she'll get more business? And she went on to say, and I love it, it's perfect for me. I'm 5 minutes from my mum who's looking after my kids, and I get to employ 3 of my friends who live here as well. And I was grounded at that moment because I realised this community that don't feel they belong to the city centre was as equally as important as everybody else. And actually their aspirations wasn't what I thought they were. I had to learn to understand that everybody has different aspirations and we have to treat them as individuals. And we have literally turned the strategy of Bristol is Open on its head now. We are now putting people right at the middle of everything we do. It has to be the people. We're working with them. We've got some issues that we believe that under this we need to address. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But instead of starting with a technological solution, we're starting with a problem statement, and we're taking it to the people. And it's killing my design team because they think they want to start designing and I won't let them yet. And they've never ever had to experience that. So I'm just going to focus, sorry, click a wrong way. Obviously can't work with technology. So today what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to talk about the sort of focus area up here. And some of the issues that we need to address because the city does have a problem. We have had a physical 50% drop in central government funding in Bristol already. And that means that this growing population of the elderly, sorry, I just categorised them, I'm so sorry. Okay, they're not getting the support because we have not got the resources to deal with it. So when Jez came along and said to me, would you be part of this? And I couldn't say no. I have a particular passion for supporting it anyway. We thought about this in the context of the exercise we're already looking at, is that we were already working with the health organisations and the community carers, and we've already established that with some technology in their homes that we can actually help improve lives, make people's lives happier, probably prevent a lot of illnesses, etc. Then we immediately hit the hurdle. Most of these were lived in houses where putting this technology in becomes a bit of a challenge. So for me, my sort of ask of anybody who's building a house today is to please think about what I'm describing as the fourth utility. One of the reasons the UK is only at 5% fibre coverage, I think we're the second lowest in the world now for getting fibre out there, is because our existing telcos will take the fibre to their cabinet, and sometimes you'll be lucky and they'll get it to a pole, but from your pole it's coming in over a copper wire because they have not got a route direct into your house without digging up your drive or whatever else. And houses aren't built to take this at the moment, and we need builders to make sure. I'd like to see the planners make it a prerequisite. You get planning permission, you've got to put ducting in for the communications, water, electric, gas, communications. So we need to learn from it. So we were looking at the technology that goes in the homes, and I've already had my 5-minute warning starting here. So we are. See, even when I wrote the slides, I did say the latter years.
That's fine.
I'm not quite as old as you, but I do categorise myself in that. My granddaughter keeps telling me I haven't grown up yet, and thank God. She used to say to me, "You cannot stop and be grown up before we've gone clubbing together." I do it every Christmas. And every Christmas morning I'm trashed and she's going, "What's for dinner?" So it is a state of mind.
Yeah.
It is a state of mind. Now, just to give you a hint of some of the technologies that we're already looking at, and none of these are brand new. The reality is these companies are out here with all of these solutions already. And what we've decided as a city is to how can we pull it together and enable it. So we're working with the West of England Academic Health Organisation, who are helping us pull all parts of the societies involved, all parts of that community, to start looking at technology that will help us improve our lives. Now, it isn't necessarily only for the latter years. Remote and security access on the door. Well, I think we're all probably feel more comfortable with some of those things. The Alexa, and I think things like the Alexa, I'm really seeing that. A friend of mine, she's in her 90s now, and an avid reader. Every day of her life, she'll read the paper front to back. Now, unfortunately, her eyesight's failing, and she said, "My mind is still here, but my body's failing me." And we put an Alexa in, and you just cannot believe the difference. Alexa reads the paper to her. Now it reads every book. She now it's even to the syndrome where she can't sleep at night, like so many of us. She wakes up in the middle of the night, but she always likes to know the time. But if she turns the light on, she can't get back to sleep. She's trained her Alexa to say, "It's quietly 3 o'clock in the morning. Go back to sleep, Joyce." and she works. Now, that's just a small example of the scenarios that we could be looking at to improve her life. She was losing the will as her eyesight went. She's as sprightly as she ever is. She's as cheeky as she ever was as well. I've done it again. So just to quickly finish off with some of the scenarios, and some of these are already being supported. There's an operations centre that actually manages a great many things in this city, and that operations centre manages a lot of telecare. And that telecare is everything from monitors in beds that will help people who may be having an epileptic fit. It's helping us to start understand if somebody's pattern has changed. We're looking at how can we be more preventive, how can we react, particularly if you're living in isolation, how can we ensure that somebody gets in there early enough. Last winter, Bristol saw a massive increase of people hitting our ICU beds with bronchitis. And it's because when they got a cold, they didn't go and see anybody, they didn't feel they were making it. What we want to do is prevent that. We want to keep people at home longer. We want to keep them happier and much healthier. There's just about every technology you can imagine. We just need to find a way. And for me, when the builders are building houses now, please build the ability to put these in from day one, because it actually is relevant. I'm not going to go into this too much for now because I'm timed out, but just to say that this is how we work now. We are an entity of collaboration. The citizens, city authorities, the private sector, we can't do this out of the private sector. I'm literally publicly funded, I'm constantly chasing funding to do this experimentation, and that's, the private sector is incredibly important to us. Innovators, the city of young people who will look at the problem in a very different way, and we've got some of them working with us, and I'll be honest, I thought I was a creative. I'm not in their league, and without the resources of the academia, we could not pull some of these projects off at the moment. So I'm get the right one now. So thank you for the time. I'm now going to hand it back to you. Probably
Thanks, Julie. Sorry, I'm getting a reputation for being a bit of a kind of stickler on the time, but I'm just kind of keen to get through. Jonathan, are you good to go? So just to give a sentence on Jonathan Davis, architect, more than 30 years experience in environmental stewardship and sustainable design. Yeah? Yeah, okay.
I must be getting on then. Not all.
No.
On. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I'm going to try and run 2 screens. Oops. Oh.
I'm not the only one that thinks
you
up
have
is
to press
forward.
down.
Down to go up.
Forward.
Yeah.
Okay. I have my notes on my Mac, so so I'm going to try and run 2 screens at the same time. So I want to tell a lot of stories, and this is about well, some experiences I've had, been fortunate to have been able to take part in. And I flew in from Seattle, Washington, and arrived this morning, so I've been feeling good, but I've just all of a sudden started to feel really fuzzy. But I live in America, but I'm from here originally, and a lot of what I learned growing up here and visiting family here has come to shape the work that I now do. This is the village of Godmanchester, where my great aunt lived in this 2-story house. It's a village that has old people in it. It's a village that has maybe old people pushing children in wheelchairs. It's a village of community. She lived in this house, 2-story house, until she was 90. And she walked to church, she walked to the store, she walked to the post office. And to touch on points that have been made already this evening, stairs are great. When people tell them, and Americans love this, I need a 1-story house because I'm 60 and I don't want to deal with stairs. And I'm like, you need to deal with stairs. So, and I tell this story to them, and this is the village of Godmanchester. And it's a village. It was the community that we all lived in until not so long ago. And this is the town of Wokingham in Berkshire, where I grew up. This was my house. I'd walk into town. I'd walk to the train station to go to school.